My professional life as a healer began in 1986. I wasn't, of course, my first contact with such things. That began pretty well 20 years earlier, when there was a lot to do in the British press about the question, is healing real? Does it work? Or is it just a way of extracting money from the hopelessly ill? And there was a lot of stories there about people being given a death sentence by the medicos, going to a healer, and then, all the problems disappeared. And then, of course, the medicos are asked, well, how did this happen? And to which they reply, oh, that's not healing, that's spontaneous remission. And then the medicos, of course, were asked, well, what's the difference between healing and spontaneous remission, and how can you tell the difference? And one got one of two answers. And the most common answer was the question was just simply ignored. And the second most common was, well, you're not a doctor, you wouldn't understand. Now, I was by no means satisfied with this, everything left hanging in the air. And so I started, as a schoolboy, researching things for myself, and I came into contact with several healers and was permitted to observe them working, and could very quickly determine, yes, healing is real, it does work. Then, for me, the automatic second question was, well, what's different about these people who can do it? Now, that took a lot longer to determine, and the answer to that is nothing at all. Which led me to the third question, well, if that's the case, how can I do it? And for many, many years, that was my hobby, studying in this area of, what is the origin of healing? What's the difference between healing and medicine? And there's an enormous difference. But I won't go into that right now. What I want to talk to you about right now is when my life was turned upon its head, or perhaps more accurately, finally turned upon its feet, back in 1986, and my hobby became my profession. And of course, I didn't stop learning then either. I've been learning now for another 40-odd years. And then, the year later, 1987, brought me to Germany. And in Germany, it just completely took off for me. And it was like the flavor that everybody wanted was the English healer in Germany at that time. At that time, healing was still treated as a crime in Germany. It was not until February 2004 that the Bundesgerichtshof, that's the highest court in Germany, ruled that healing is not a crime. It is not subject to medical supervision. It's an independent thing all on its own that has nothing to do with any other sort of medicine or therapy. Great. But as I say, until then, it was treated as a crime, and people were put into prison for successfully healing people that the medicos had told to go away and die. Now, this went on for quite some time, and you may well remember a small event of the collapse of the then Russian Empire, and how it was gradually discovered that the Russians had been researching quite intensely in this area. And there were many Russian healers who were not only amazingly skilled, but also they'd been state-supported to carry out their researches, to learn how to do these things. So in the last 10 years, there's been a great movement in Germany away from the English healers being the preferred flavor to the Russian healers. Well, it's not a problem. There are so many people needing our help that it doesn't really matter. There's no shortage of customers. And the best healers cooperate, of course. And one of the best Russian healers is called Poroshenko. And he developed a technique for clearing the thoughts. And this has to do with the basic life programs, which are stored in the cerebral lobes. Now, there are only a few basic programs, but there are thousands of sub-programs. So you might have a program running saying, you can't have money. And you'll have lots and lots of sub-programs which will lead you to, I don't know, you pick the right number for the lottery, but before sending it in, you change one of them and you win nothing. Or you turn up too late for the perfect higher paid job. All sorts of stuff like that. That are all sub-programs of the basic program that says you can't have any money, you must be poor. Or you might have one running that says you will always have problems in relationships, which will lead you to, for example, form connections with people who are not capable of a meaningful relationship. So you end up with a mother-son or a father-daughter relationship instead of a partnership. Lots and lots of things like this. And what Poroshenko discovered is that you could take these programs out of the brain, clean them, so they function the way they were intended to, and then put them back. And so when you remove a program that says you can't have money, what then happens is that the natural flow of abundance comes into play. Or if you remove the one that says you will never be loved, the natural resonance will bring you into contact with someone with which you can create a partnership. And this is very, very, very effective. Back at the beginning of July 2018, I and a few of my friends experienced this directly from one of the people who'd learned this technique from Poroshenko. And I must say, it is very effective. It is quite amazing the results it brings. Unfortunately, this person who had learned it then disappeared. Now, I'm one of those people, because I know so much in this area, very frequently when I experience a technique from some other healer, I can very quickly work out exactly how it's done, which in this case I was also able to do. And then quite quickly discovered that this is only the first phase. You see, the basic programs gives you the basic instructions for life, but they need the feelings to have power. And as long as your feelings are connected to old trauma, so, you may have experienced constant rejection as a child, which has given rise to this life program, nobody will ever love you. But the emotional structures do not experience time. So a traumatic event, which may have happened 20, 30, 40 years ago, for the emotional body, they're still happening now. And because this trauma has connection, access to your feelings, it keeps recreating itself. So the second phase is to disconnect the feelings from the old traumas. That means that the traumatic events are still remembered, and probably even more clearly remembered, but it's a bit like seeing it in the cinema. It's got nothing to do with me, because the feelings no longer reactivate the old trauma. It's just something that happened in the past, done with. So that makes your cleaned programs can then have pretty well unrestricted access to your feelings, and then they can create themselves in the natural way, the way in which you really want them to. And then there is a third phase, and that is that the medulla oblongata, which in Kriya Yoga, for example, is known as the center of Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness, then comes into its own and begins feeding your entire control structures with divine countenance. I can't find a better expression for it than that. It's something quite dramatic when you experience it, this feeling of finally being connected with your own source. And because you're connected with your source, you stop doing what you believe other people want you to do and start doing what you want to do. Now, you may well be aware that over the last few years I put quite a few transmissions upon YouTube, the healing transmissions. Last year, the clearing transmissions, or the introduction to the clearing transmissions, they don't work very well on YouTube. They work much better on DVD. So I only just put a sample upon them. But here, the attempt to try to do a general transmission which would clean anybody's brain didn't work. The test subject I used to make a video of it worked for her. Wonderful. But as soon as I showed it to other test people, they got thunderous headaches because it wasn't their program that was being corrected. I can only do this on a one-to-one basis. And this I do online via Wire. It's wire.com. You see URL here. And this is something that's very, very similar to Skype. There's a good reason for this. It was created by the same people who created Skype in the first place. But Skype, as you may well know, no longer functions really because Microsoft have added so much spyware to it that the communications method, it only works half the time. And the people who originally created Microsoft, the programmers, originally created Skype, the programmers who created it, they left Microsoft because they'd seen what Microsoft had done with it and went and created Wire. And Wire is an open source project. And anybody can download it and use it for free, just like you can with Skype, with the difference that it functions, it works. So Wire works anywhere where you've got internet. So we do these sessions on a one-to-one basis. All 3 sessions are over about 10 days. Sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. Twice so far I've had to split phase 1 into 2 sessions because the damage to the programs has been so severe. And over the 3 sessions, you'll get a complete new basic structure in your life. Things will start working the way you want them to, instead of going round in a vicious circle because your feelings coupled to old traumas and, so we say, distorted programs just keep repeating the same old rubbish that you never wanted in the first place. So this is what we do. If you want to find out more, just go to this webpage here and maybe we will meet online via Wire. Thank you for watching. Namaste.